Chapter 13. Indeed, Fitch's face darkened as if someone had stepped on it with a dirty shoe as soon as Jean's voice fell. He glared fiercely at the naive Han Shuo and said to Jean, "Master Jean, this audacious errand slave dared trip me, how can I not teach him a lesson?" Fitch rolled up his sleeves as he spoke and took out his gray magic staff, swinging it towards Han Shuo's forehead. Han Shuo breathed a sigh of relief when he saw that Fitch hadn't used magic and was only using the magic staff to hit him. Although Fitch was tall, he didn't have much strength. Han Shuo saw that the blow didn't have much force behind it and directly ignored it. He stood where he was and didn't dodge, only smiling foolishly. Slap. When the magic staff hit Han Shuo's forehead, Han Shuo suddenly felt pain and immediately cried out in agony. He grimaced in pain as he looked at the magic staff in Fitch's hand. He hadn't thought that the seemingly wooden magic staff would be as hard and heavy as iron and stone. Han Shuo only felt his head buzz in that instant as a large, round bump appeared on his forehead. Damn it, why is this magic staff so hard and heavy? I've miscalculated. Han Shuo thought to himself as his head buzzed, and before he could react, he was hit on the forehead again. His head immediately sank and he fainted on the ground. When Han Shuo woke up, he found himself lying on a large, soft bed. The faint smell of medicine permeated the air. He reached out to touch his forehead and found that the two large bumps on his head had already subsided. Some kind of medicine seemed to have been applied on them, and they felt cool and comfortable. "You're awake." A pretty face suddenly moved closer. She had long, lavender, wavy hair, bright eyes, and white teeth. Her sexy red lips breathed a faint fragrance onto Han Shuo's face. "Master? Fanny." Han Shuo's heart skipped a beat as he exclaimed softly when he saw the pretty face in front of him. He then straightened his body and sat up on the soft bed, looking around. The room was 20 square meters in size and was surrounded by large cabinets that held all sorts of medicine bottles. There were also some skeletons of magical creatures to the side. The walls were covered in magical patterns and words, and there was a round black stone table in the middle that formed a simple magical matrix. With just a glance, Han Shuo knew that this was Fanny's lab. While Han Shuo was looking around, Fanny was also looking at Han Shuo in surprise. It was only when Han Shuo's head turned around and looked at her that Fanny stretched out her slender finger and lightly touched Han Shuo's forehead. She then exclaimed softly and said in surprise, The swelling has subsided so quickly. There's not even a drop of blood after being hit by such a heavy magic staff. How is this possible?" Han Shuo's heart skipped a beat when he was touched by Fanny's finger. His nose even greedily inhaled deeply, and a trace of a satisfied smile blossomed at the corner of his mouth as he smelled the delicate fragrance that came along with her finger. Han Shuo's behavior gave Fanny quite a fright. Han Shuo's actions just now had a few hints of teasing and wanton, completely different from Brian's usual timid and cowardly behavior. This caused Fanny to be a bit taken aback for a moment, and then sighed in realization. She murmured softly, "I didn't believe them before, but now it looks like Brian is indeed a bit crazy. Who would have thought that an agony of the soul would make him like this?" Sigh. Although Fanny's murmur was exceedingly quiet, Han Shuo just happened to hear it loud and clear. He laughed wryly in his heart, thinking that yet another person had really believed that he was crazy. Suddenly, an expression full of interest appeared on Fanny's pretty face. She said in high spirits, "Brian, the bruise on your forehead healed so quickly and you're completely fine now. Could it be because of the agony of the soul last time? This is too incredible. I have another topic to research. Necromancy magic is incredible indeed." Han Shuo could only smile wryly at her self-righteousness when he saw Fanny's face full of excitement as she frantically rummaged through the items. Right now, the impression that Han Shuo gave her was that of a crazy person. He naturally couldn't explain that his body's abnormalities were entirely due to practicing magical yuan. Fanny hadn't brought her glasses with her again today. Her slender, supple hands quickly rummaged through the magical items around her. After a while, she held a pale green ball the size of a palm in her hand and walked quickly towards Han Shuo, swaying her hips as she suddenly chanted an incantation. The pale green ball abruptly lit up with a gentle green halo and was pressed against Han Shua's forehead by her jade hand. Strong magical pulses emanated from within the ball, and the pale green ball imprinted on Han Shua's forehead was like a magnet, drawing out a trace of mental strength from Han Shua's brain. The pale green ball suddenly flashed like a broken green light bulb. "Oh, this is incredible. Brian, you actually have mental strength in your brain. My goodness, what's going on? Could it be that the agony of the soul magic also has the effect of baptizing ordinary people with mental strength? This is too amazing." Fanny suddenly cried out, shock and astonishment written all over her face. It looked like Han Shua had mental strength in his brain, and the impact on Fanny wasn't small. "I've decided this will be my research topic in the future. If the agony of the soul doesn't turn people into lunatics and can still retain mental strength in the body, then wouldn't it be possible for an ordinary person to become a mage? Oh, this is just too amazing." Gurgle gurgle. At this moment, Han Shua's stomach protested with hunger. The excitement on Fanny's face hadn't faded yet, and she said to Brian in high spirits, "It's getting late, go back and rest. I'll look for you often in the future. I'll discuss this with the school authorities in a while, and we'll reduce your workload appropriately and increase your meals appropriately until I've successfully researched this topic." Han Shua couldn't help but feel overjoyed when he heard Fanny's words. He couldn't help but have wicked thoughts as he looked at the alluring Fanny. He thought to himself that luck really couldn't be stopped now that his workload had suddenly been reduced, his meals had increased, and he could even take the opportunity to get close to Fanny. It looked like Fitch's battle had done him a great favor. After leaving Fanny's lab, Han Shua lifted his head to look at the afterglow in the sky and knew that it was already evening. He rubbed his forehead and discovered that apart from a bit of a slight pain, there were no major issues. He completed the afternoon's mission with great speed and ran into Jack at the bread collection area, panting heavily. Jack revealed a surprised expression when he saw Han Shua appear and looked oddly at Han Shua's forehead. He asked suspiciously, "Brian, didn't I hear that you fainted after Fitch hit you with his magic staff? How come there aren't any marks now?" "Master Fanny helped me apply a magic reagent, so the redness naturally faded quickly." "Haha, Master Fanny is so beautiful and gentle." Han Shua laughed heartily as he spoke to Jack. "Brian, this is your food for today." A shout traveled from the canteen window. Han Shua immediately ran over and received a piece of white bread, a small cup of milk, and a fried egg from the window. Mr. Gotha, are you mistaken? Brian's food should be the same as ours, and it should be smaller than my bread." Carrie, who'd been beaten up by Han Shua last time, shook a piece of black bread in his hand and spoke loudly to the fat Gotha who was in charge of distributing the errand boy's meals. Gotha looked coldly at Carrie and snorted lightly. "That's right, the school authorities ordered this. From now on, Brian's food will be like this. Take it up with the school authorities if you have any objections." But you're just a little errand boy, you'll be asking for trouble if you say anything." Holding the white bread, milk, and fried egg in his hands, Han Shua laughed heartily as he looked at Carrie and Borg's angry expressions. He purposefully chewed on the bread loudly and couldn't help but praise, "This white bread tastes different from black bread indeed. Ah, there's even milk and eggs. Oh my gosh, what a happy day. Brian, let me drink some milk. That milk looks delicious to me." Little fatty Jack licked his lips and looked at Han Shua with a face full of envy. "There's still half a cup left, take it." Han Shua generously handed it over to Jack and then pulled Jack away with a wide grin, leaving behind a furious Carrie and Borg. When he returned to the warehouse that night, Han Shua took a look at the little skull and discovered that the little skull was still lying in the small wooden bucket. However, the 7 small whirlpools within the bucket had stopped spinning. One look at Han Shua and he understood that this was because the magical yuan had been used up. He reached out to condense his magical yuan and reinfused it into the 7 broken bones. Only when the whirlpools appeared around the 7 broken bones did Han Shua finally stop and go to bed. The Yin magical concentrating formation was only one method of refining demonic treasures. Logically speaking, a single infusion of magical yuan should have been able to maintain the formation for 36 days. However, Han Shua's magical yuan was too weak, and the materials he'd used were all scraped together haphazardly. Therefore, he hadn't been able to achieve the desired results. Sitting on the bed and practicing for a while, Han Shua felt that the magical yuan within his body had grown quite a bit. A light bulb went off in his head at this moment. Since he had magical yuan in his body, could he practice the offensive demonic yuan that Chu Kanglin had left behind? Han Shua immediately furrowed his brow and thought hard after the thought occurred to him. He could vaguely sense that there were many demonic cultivation methods in his mind, except that many of these demonic cultivation methods were a bit hazy and indistinct, as if they were separated by a thin, blurry paper that he couldn't immediately pry into clearly. Han Shua furrowed his brow and painstakingly searched through his memories. He discovered that the memories in his brain seemed to be a complete mess, and he couldn't remember everything. There were only 3 methods that he could completely remember. One was the basic demonic method, the other was the magical concentration matrix, for refining demonic treasures, and another was the mystical glacial spellfire. The mystical glacial spellfire was a method of utilizing magical yuan. Its power could be continuously increased as one's realm increased. Circulating the spellfire according to a special meridian route, one could produce red and purple magical flames in one's fingers and palm. The red flames were scorching hot and the purple cold. If one's magical yuan was strong enough and his realm reached a high enough level, he could condense the magical yuan into 2 enormous balls of red and purple magical flames in the palms of his hands. They had the attacking power of burning and piercing coldness. After clarifying all this, Han Shua immediately felt as if he had obtained a treasure. Ignoring the other obstructed memories, he immediately began circulating the magical yuan according to the spellfire and slowly gathered the magical yuan in his right hand. As the magical yuan flowed through the meridians of Han Shua's right hand, he felt a burning pain. His entire right hand was numb and stiff, and the thin and weak meridians felt as if they had been electrocuted. If he didn't circulate the spellfire according to the spellfire's route, the magical yuan would reach his palm in an instant. However, once the magical yuan circulated according to the spellfire's spellfire, it seemed to encounter layers upon layers of obstacles. Every time it moved forward, it was an unbearable pain. It wasn't until late at night that Han Shua finally circulated the magical yuan from his shoulder to his wrist. However, his entire arm was already aching and powerless. Han Shua understood that the mystical glacial spellfire could only be truly used when he circulated all the magical yuan to his palm and fingers. The pain he was experiencing now was due to the process of opening up those tiny meridians and allowing them to adapt to the magical yuan. The prickling pain was unavoidable now, but it would be gone once all the meridians were opened up. Han Shua's eyelids were twitching due to the extreme fatigue. Remembering that he still had work tomorrow, and that training in magical yuan wasn't something that could be accomplished overnight, he threw himself onto the bed and slept first. Han Shua had another dream that night. He dreamt that the little skull had obeyed his orders and beat up Fitch, who had hit him on the forehead, to avenge him. Chapter 14. The next day, Han Shua was woken up by the impact of a heavy garbage bag. Han Shua, who had been in the midst of a beautiful dream, felt a heavy mountain pressing down on him. He hastily scrambled out of bed and rubbed his eyes to see that there was an extra heavy garbage bag on his bed. He immediately understood that it must have been someone who had thrown the garbage through the small window of the warehouse. As he cursed, he kicked the trash bag off the bed. With a plop sound, the trash bag rolled toward the door. Han Shua was just about to bury his head and go back to sleep when he thought that someone had thrown a garbage bag at him. This meant that it was definitely getting late. He pushed open the window and looked outside, discovering that the sun was indeed high up in the sky. He immediately sighed to himself that he must have overslept today because he was too tired from practicing demonic magic yesterday. He got up and was about to rush out of the door when he suddenly remembered the dream he had yesterday. In the dream, it seemed that Little Skull had helped him teach Fitch a lesson. Remembering that the dream had come true last time, Han Shua's heart jumped and he hurriedly looked towards the small wooden barrel. Inside the small wooden tub, the little skeleton's 2 dark hand bone rings were placed on the edge of the wooden tub. Its left leg bone was placed on top of its right leg bone, swinging back and forth, as if it was enjoying a sauna. It looked very carefree and relaxed. Han Shua couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief when he saw that little skull was still in the barrel. He muttered to himself for a moment, then got up and pushed the barrel under his bed. He used a garbage bag to block the bottom of the bed before opening the door and preparing for a new day of work. "Hey Brian, why are you only here today?" Jack was wiping the stone statues on the road and greeted Brian with a smile from afar. Han Shua looked around and saw that there weren't any students passing by on this road. He knew that class must have already started by now. He had woken up late today. "Oh, I was hit twice on the head by Fitch yesterday. My head was groggy, that's why I overslept." Jack suddenly chuckled lightly, taking pleasure in others' misfortune. He then sneakily moved closer to Han Shua and said in a low voice, "Brian, don't be angry. I heard from the students on the road this morning that Fitch was beaten up by that little skull with 7 wings who appeared last time. His face is swollen now." Han Shua. It turned out that yesterday's dream was real, but it was different from what he had imagined. This time, the little skull was much faster, and he had already finished his task. No wonder when he saw the little skull in the morning, the little skull's posture was obviously different from last night. "Hey, Brian, why aren't you saying anything? Are you too happy?" "Haha, I think so too. That black little skull is really powerful. After Fitch woke up, I heard that he only saw 7 little wings flapping before he jumped out of the window and escaped without a trace. Fitch lives on the 4th floor. It's incredible that he didn't break into pieces." Han Shua laughed dryly and felt a wave of satisfaction in his heart. He laughed it off and said, "Well done, I wonder who summoned that little skull to help me vent my frustrations. I've been so lucky recently." Nothing unlucky happened to Han Shua in the following days, and no one came looking for Han Shua to practice their magic. During these rare days of peace, Han Shua would arrive outside the necromancy class early in the morning and eavesdrop on Jean's lessons with a broom in hand. Fitch didn't know if it was because he'd been viciously beaten up by the little skull, but he didn't come to class these days. Instead, he eavesdropped on Jean's explanations of magic every day. Han Shua was suddenly enlightened about many things that he hadn't understood in the past after a few days of eavesdropping. When night fell, Han Shua first practiced the mystical glacial spell fire and circulated the magical yuan bit by bit to the 5 fingers of his right hand through the mystical glacial spell fire. He felt a burning pain every time, but Han Shua could already circulate the magical yuan until it was almost near his wrist these days. Han Shua continued to study the foundations of necromancy, as usual, and committed some of the parts that he didn't understand to heart. He waited to eavesdrop on Jean's lessons in the morning to see if he'd mentioned it. Now that Han Shua's meals and treatment had improved, the nutrients in his body had been replenished. Add to that the fact that he was training in magical yuan, Han Shua's originally frail body had unwittingly started to solidify some of his muscles. His short stature seemed to have grown a bit taller, and his entire demeanor seemed to have changed. The necromancy students took note of Han Shua's changes and categorized it as a sign that he'd gone mad. No one paid too much attention to Han Shua, and Han Shua was happy and at ease. He continued to work and secretly practice magic as usual, happily feeling the changes in his body. Oh, endless darkness, transform into the bone arrow of destruction. With my will, destroy everything before me, bone arrow. As the incantation was completed, a sharp bone arrow suddenly formed in the air and flew towards a straw doll in front of Han Shua under his fingers. However, the bone arrow suddenly changed direction midway. The bone arrow abruptly exploded midway, and from the looks of it, the arrow had deviated by a large margin. It hadn't shot towards the straw doll at all. Shaking his head, Han Shua sighed lowly. Understanding was one thing, and using it was another. Han Shua had been practicing this lowest level of bone arrow magic near this tomb during this period of time, but he'd never been able to successfully cast it. Either he couldn't summon it, or the direction was too far off, or the bow and arrow would explode midway. Han Shuo understood that repeated practice was necessary in order to successfully cast necromancy magic. Only through repeated practice would one be able to grasp the knack and successfully cast the magic without any mistakes or loopholes. Every night these past few days, Han Shuo would first practice for a period of time, and then take advantage of the dead of night to come to this tomb that had once been abandoned, to secretly practice necromancy magic here. Little Skull held 2 bags of trash in his hands, and after throwing them away, he obediently stayed in one of the tombs, motionless. Just as Han Shuo was thinking about his incantation and hand gestures, as well as what went wrong with the use of his mental strength, he suddenly heard the sound of hurried footsteps coming from afar. Han Shuo's heart jumped, and he hurriedly hid in the pile of rocks next to the tomb. This tomb was very wide, and it was very quiet at night. Apart from Han Shuo occasionally coming over to throw away some discarded magical materials, very few people would come here. Of course, Han Shuo didn't want others to discover that he was secretly practicing magic here. Now that he heard the sound of footsteps, he naturally hid immediately. After a while, a tall, blue-haired, middle-aged man suddenly appeared in Han Shuo's line of sight. His clothes were dyed crimson with blood, and he was foaming at the corner of his mouth. He held a broadsword in his hand. His footsteps were unsteady, and his expression was anxious. He stumbled over without a sense of direction and kept peeking behind him. When he arrived at the place where Han Shuo had been practicing his necromancy magic, his body suddenly trembled, and his footsteps swayed as he fell to the ground. At this moment, he swiftly fished out a gray handbag from his chest and carelessly poked at the soft ground a few times. He stuffed the handbag into the soil, wiped it flat with his hands, and crawled back up to run forward. "Dylan, where else can you run to?" A kind voice traveled in from the distance as a black light flashed by. A kind, emaciated old man appeared behind the middle-aged man. He wore a kind smile on his face and wore a gilded magic robe. He held a magic staff embedded with 3 red, yellow, and blue gems in his left hand. One could tell with a glance that it was a very valuable magic staff. A ball of dark green light quickly flew over from the distance after the emaciated, benevolent old mage appeared. When it stopped here, the dark green light suddenly disappeared, and a sturdy, muscular swordsman with a long sword appeared. "Mr. Duke, what should we do with Dylan?" The swordsman stood respectfully next to the mage and asked humbly. The benevolent old mage Duke furrowed his sparse eyebrows and looked at Dylan, who was lying on the ground with blood foaming at the corner of his mouth. He sighed lowly. "Poor Dylan, I'm afraid he can't make it. He shouldn't continue to suffer like this. Eric, help him." "Mr. is truly merciful," the swordsman Eric exclaimed with an odd expression. He suddenly rushed towards the still-running Dylan like lightning. Han Shuo only saw a ball of dark green light flash through the air before Dylan's back splattered with blood. He finally collapsed to the ground, motionless. Eric put away the long sword in his hand and immediately crouched down to rummage through Dylan's body. His face gradually grew unsightly as he finally stood up and said helplessly to Duke, "Mr. Duke, the item isn't on him." "How is this possible?" Duke was startled and his complexion slightly changed. He waved the magic staff in his hand, and Dylan's corpse suddenly flew in front of Duke. Duke chanted a wind magic incantation, and several sharp wind blades suddenly formed in the air. So, the wind blades danced in the air, and the clothes of Dylan's corpse were torn apart. Han Shuo hid behind the rubble and saw everything clearly. Eric's long sword had blossomed with a dark green light when he'd suddenly flown out just now. It was obvious that he was a senior swordsman. Such a senior swordsman was so respectful to Duke, indicating that Duke's identity or strength was even greater. This was the first time Han Shuo had seen someone kill someone. His heart was in a state of chaos and his heart thumped rapidly. "It really isn't on him." Duke frowned as he muttered to himself. He shook the magic staff in his hand and threw Dylan's naked corpse to the ground like trash. Duke shook the magic staff again and a strong mental strength rippled towards Han Shuo. Han Shuo's body was involuntarily brought flying towards Duke. "How did you know I was there?" Han Shuo was flustered in his heart and even more so with his mouth. He made a big fuss as he danced in the air. Heh, what a cute and pure young fellow. Judging from your clothes, you seem to be from the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force, am I right? Duke looked at Han Shuo benevolently. As soon as he finished speaking, Han Shuo suddenly fell from the sky and landed on the ground. Yes, I'm an errand boy from the Babylon Academy. I'm here to throw out magical waste. I didn't see anything just now. It's getting late. You guys continue chatting, I'll be heading back first. Han Shuo stood up from the ground and spoke with a face full of innocence. He took 2 unhurried steps in the direction of the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force, then abruptly increased his speed and ran with all his strength. He thought that these 2's strange behavior might be disadvantageous to him, so it was best to leave as soon as possible. Heh, this young fellow is quite crafty. Eric, you see him off. Duke laughed softly behind Han Shuo and said benevolently. Han Shuo had already felt a strong gust of air rapidly approaching him as soon as Duke's voice had sounded. Chapter 15. Han Shuo understood in his heart that Eric must be rapidly approaching him with his sword in hand, wanting to kill him just like how he killed Dylan. This was because Han Shuo could feel the killing intent faintly approaching from behind. At this moment, Han Shuo focused his attention for the first time in his life. He didn't know if it was because of the magical yuan he was training in, but the current Han Shuo was not only extremely nimble, even his courage had grown. Otherwise, if it was according to his previous personality, there would only be fear left in his heart, and no other thoughts. At this moment, the magical yuan within Han Shuo's body circulated at a much faster speed than usual. As he ran, he felt that his entire body was filled with inexhaustible strength. Add to that the fact that Han Shuo was extremely familiar with the terrain, he turned left and right as he ran, and actually managed to shake off Eric by a distance. Eric was startled. He didn't seem to have anticipated that Han Shuo would run so fast. Seeing that not only was Han Shuo running fast, but he was also running in a tricky direction and was gradually disappearing from his line of sight, Eric's face couldn't help but turn cold. The long sword in his hand glowed with a dark green light, and he abruptly picked up a few large rocks along the way. Han Shuo ran further and further away, feeling that this run was very carefree. When he sensed that Eric's aura was getting further and further away, a sense of joy involuntarily arose in his heart. It was at this moment that the sound of something piercing through the air suddenly rang out. Han Shuo only felt his legs being struck heavily a few times. His knees immediately weakened, and he fell flat on his face in the midst of his rapid running. His face intimately came into contact with the soil, and he fell flat on his face. "Young man, my apologies," Eric softly called out apologetically. He raised the long sword in his hand, and a ball of dark green light abruptly lit up in the air, violently stirring towards Han Shuo. His mind was unprecedentedly clear. The magical yuan within Han Shuo's body circulated wildly, and his previously sore and powerless legs no longer hurt. Facing this fatal blow, Han Shuo pressed both his hands and feet to the ground at the same time, and with a ferocious push, he abruptly rolled to the left. Clang! Eric's long sword brought with it a dark green ball of light as it landed on the ground where Han Shuo had been lying, carving out a dozen or so well-proportioned cracks in the hard ground. It was like a chessboard, and each crack was a dozen centimeters deep. If Han Shuo had been there just now, he'd likely have been dismembered. "I really didn't see anything. Don't kill me." Han Shuo dodged the attack and looked at the strange condition of the ground he was lying on earlier. He was immediately frightened out of his wits. He spoke with a bitter face as he hurriedly climbed up, looking like he was going to run away again. "Young man, I didn't expect you to be so agile. But you saw something you shouldn't have seen today. I'm very sorry, but I have to kill you." Eric shrugged and smiled helplessly. He then raised his long sword, and a few head-sized rocks suddenly flew up and fiercely smashed towards Han Shuo. Han Shuo was startled and dodged left and right with trepidation. While Han Shuo was dodging, Eric suddenly appeared behind Han Shuo without a sound and pointed his long sword slightly. A ball of dark green light suddenly fell into Han Shua's body. In an instant, Han Shua flew out and once again fell flat on his face. A bone-piercing pain seeped into his spine, and the magical yuan within his body madly converged towards his back, tightly wrapping around the ball of dark green light that had fallen into Han Shua's body. Phew! Why does it feel like I've lost a bit of my fighting aura? That's strange. Could it be that I've been too tired lately? Yes, that must be it. This kid runs quite fast. Good thing I've finally taken care of it. Just as Han Shua was about to continue running, he suddenly heard Eric mumble to himself. The state of Han Shua's body just now was exactly the same as when Claude's fighting aura had entered his body. The only difference was that Eric's dark green fighting aura was a bit more powerful, and the magical yuan within Han Shua's body wasn't able to completely wrap around it. Therefore, right now, Han Shua's back was a bloody mess, and he looked quite horrifying from the outside. With a thought, Han Shua held his breath and lay there, not daring to move. However, at this moment, the little skull seemed to have sensed Han Shua's danger and seemed to be planning to rush over to save him. Perhaps it was due to the excessive pain, but Han Shua felt that his mental strength was unprecedentedly focused. In a split second, he issued an order for the little skull to stay where he was without moving. The grave that the little skull was in was some distance away from Duke. However, if the little skull climbed out of the grave and rushed over, Duke would definitely notice. Although he didn't know Duke's mage rank, Han Shua knew from his previous actions that he was very powerful. Naturally, he wasn't willing to let the little skull die in vain. Eric took a few breaths and mumbled a few words to himself. He grabbed Han Shua from the back of his robe and brought him to a broken grave. Without even checking the condition of Han Shua's body, he confidently threw Han Shua into the grave, as if believing that Han Shua was already dead. Thinking about it, Han Shua was only an ordinary errand slave. Naturally, he would die without a doubt after taking a blow from a senior swordsman. How could there be any accidents? After throwing Han Shua into the grave, Eric didn't continue to stay there. He directly went back the way he came. After a while, there was no more movement in the area. Han Shua's back was in extreme pain. At this time, he cursed Eric and Duke's entire family in his heart. He stayed in the grave and didn't dare to come out immediately. It wasn't until nearly an hour later that Han Shua endured the pain in his back and slowly climbed out of the grave. Stretching out his hand to touch his back, Han Shua felt that his back was a little sticky. Looking at the bloodstains on his hand, Han Shua secretly remembered this hatred. He planned to pay them back one by one in the future. Gritting his teeth, he carefully walked back to the previous place. Along the way, Han Shua was very sneaky, deeply afraid that the two were still there. It wasn't until after returning to the original place that Han Shua discovered that even Dylan's body had disappeared. It seemed that they had casually thrown it into a nearby grave. Summoning Little Skull from the grave, Han Shua cursed and left with Little Skull. In his heart, he cursed at his bad luck. It seemed that he should come here less to practice for the next few days. After walking to a certain place, Han Shua suddenly stopped. Looking at the ground beneath his feet, Han Shua suddenly remembered that when Dylan was running, he had fallen here and buried a gray bag under his feet. Duke and Eric seemed to have been searching for something on Dylan's body. Could it be the bag that Dylan had buried? Squatting down with a grin, Han Shua carefully pushed away the soft soil on the ground and took out the gray bag. It was heavy in his hand, and when he shook it, it made a crisp, ding sound. Looking at the style and quality of the bag, it was much better than the one he used. Pulling the string of the bag, Han Shua reached out and grabbed a few silver and copper coins. I'm rich. I'm rich. Han Shua knew that silver and copper coins were the currency of this world. Brian had been an errand slave for so many years, yet he had never received even a single copper coin. Looking at the few silver and copper coins in his palm, Han Shua couldn't help but laugh out loud. Even the pain in his back didn't seem to be that painful anymore. Voila! The contents of the bag all fell to the ground, and a dark green jade box the size of a palm appeared on the ground. The box was heavy and had a cool feeling to it. There was also a groove that seemed to be a keyhole. Next to the dark green jade box, there really was a green key. However, this clearly wasn't the object of Han Shua's attention. All he saw was Han Shua's eyes glowing as he stared at the money in front of him. He couldn't help but mutter with a silly smile, "I'm rich. I'm rich." 3 gold, 12 silver, and 56 copper. This was the amount of money in the bag. 1 gold could be exchanged for 100 silver coins, and 1 silver could be exchanged for 100 copper coins. Even though Han Shua's diet had improved, the bread, milk, and eggs he ate a day didn't even add up to 10 copper coins. If this money was exchanged for food, it would be enough for Han Shua to eat for a year or two. When Brian was sold to the Babylon Magic Academy by the slave traders, it was only 5 gold coins. This sum of money was equivalent to half of Brian's life. After a moment of joy, Han Shua put the money back into the bag with a smile. His eyes turned and saw the dark green jade box and the green key. Han Shua creased his eyebrows. He could tell from Duke and Eric's clothing that they were of high status, especially Duke's magic robe and magic staff. They looked to be priceless items. This amount of money was naturally a large sum to him, but it shouldn't be much to Duke. They definitely wouldn't chase after Dylan for this amount of money, much less kill him. Could it be that it was because of the item in the jade box? When he thought of this, Han Shua couldn't help but focus his gaze on the dark green jade box that stood silently on the ground. Under the moonlight, the jade box sparkled with a faint green light that was hard to detect unless one looked closely. The hazy green light was very faint, and it appeared to have a kind of bewitching beauty. As Han Shua silently stared at the jade box, his mental strength was surprisingly concentrated on the jade box. He suddenly felt a cold and sinister presence within the jade box. This presence followed Han Shua's mental strength and seemed to seep into Han Shua's bones. Han Shua couldn't help but shiver and suddenly shut his eyes. This thing is a bit strange. Taking a deep breath and calming his mind, Han Shua nervously looked left and right. He suddenly put the jade box and the key back into the gray handbag and staggered back to the warehouse. After returning to the warehouse, Han Shua didn't continue to study the jade box. He didn't touch the money inside either. He hid the handbag under his bed and let Little Skull clean and bandage his back before falling into a deep sleep. Chapter 16. Noon, at the training field of the Necromancy Magic Academy. Han Shua was sweeping on and off as he thought back to Master Jean's lecture on necromancy magic that morning. His brow was slightly furrowed and he was quite engrossed. A fat figure suddenly rushed in from the door and stopped in front of Han Shua. Jack was panting heavily as he said urgently, "Brian, it's bad, Carrie and Borg are coming to settle scores with you." Han Shua was a bit displeased that his thoughts had been interrupted. He frowned and asked when he saw Jack's panicked expression, "What's going on?" "These 2 idiots, Carrie and Borg. I beat them up last time, why are they looking to die again?" "I don't know, I'm not too sure either. I only heard that they ate something this morning and seem to be in a lot of pain. Their faces are all green and they're shouting that they're coming to settle scores with you. Lisa is also looking for you." Han Shua felt a bit of pain on his back, but it was much better than last night. The dark green fighting aura on his back was still wrapped up by the magical yuan. The dark green fighting aura seemed to be shrinking and disappearing bit by bit, making Han Shua feel a bit more at ease. "They're looking to die, don't blame me." Han Shua snorted coldly and tightened his grip on the broom in his hand, looking towards the door. Jack's expression was still anxious as he rubbed his hands and said urgently, "Brian, things are different this time. Carrie and Borg have found some helpers this time, and they don't seem to be the errand boys of the necromancy major. They're all tall and strong, you better run." "Damned Brian, how dare you plot against us? I'll show you what's coming today." Carrie's voice had already traveled in from outside amidst Jack's urgent urging. A group of people had already blocked the door to the training field by the time his voice had sounded. Carrie's and Borg's faces turned green. As soon as they entered, Borg let out an ugh, and suddenly hugged his stomach. His body convulsed and he spat out a mouthful of black liquid. His breath immediately emitted a bitter sour taste. When Carrie saw what Borg had vomited out, his already pale face turned even uglier. It seemed that his stomach was also in discomfort. He reached his hand into his throat as if he wanted to vomit something out, but nothing came out. Brian, what did you make Lisa refine for us to eat? You're the death of us. I'll kill you today. After vomiting for a while, Borg's body was a little weak. He held onto the door with one hand and pointed at Han Shuo with the other and said angrily. Smiling inwardly, Han Shuo couldn't help but be speechless. Last time Lisa had asked him why he'd suddenly become so nimble and strong, he just randomly spouted some nonsense to brush her off. Who would have thought that Lisa would take it seriously and actually brew out those disgusting things? It looked like she'd experimented on Borg and Carrie. No wonder the two looked like they were on the verge of death. No, I didn't. Han Shuo shook his head and said with a blank face, looking quite silly and innocent. Lisa already told us, how dare you deny it? I won't leave until I teach you a lesson today. Carrie shouted angrily and gestured to the helpers beside him. A total of 6 errand boys, including Borg, rolled up their sleeves and walked fiercely towards Han Shuo. Apart from Carrie and Borg, the other errand boys were from the Dark Major, but they were a bit different from what Jack had described them to be tall and strong. There were indeed tall ones among the 4, but the tall ones were all skin and bones. There were also some strong ones, but they weren't as tall as Han Shuo. On the whole, the tall ones weren't strong enough, and the strong ones weren't tall enough. Judging from their fighting strength, they probably weren't all that impressive. Clenching his fists, Han Shuo's expression was still naive. There was an irrepressible desire to vent in his heart, and it seemed that he needed to beat all of these people to the ground in order to quell this desire. This desire came abruptly and instantly flooded Han Shuo's mind, urging Han Shuo to act like a spell. Han Shuo's personality had always been rather passive, and he rarely took the initiative to offend anyone. He also didn't dare stir up trouble with too much arrogance. But if he were to fight them now, with Han Shuo's current strength and speed, he might make a big deal out of it. Han Shuo was a bit unwilling, but his rationality couldn't restrain it. This feeling was exactly the same as when he'd wanted to make a move against Lisa last time in the training fields. At that time, Han Shuo had abandoned his rationality and acted according to the desires of his heart. In the end, the fighting aura that Claude had injected into his body had been dissolved by the magical yuan. Now, the situation was exactly the same. The magical yuan on Han Shuo's back was still wrapped in Eric's fighting aura, and the desire in his heart was already extremely strong. Turning around to look at the shivering Jack, Han Shuo no longer had a trace of honesty on his face. His eyes were as sharp as blades, carrying a trace of gambler's fanaticism. Handing the broom in his hand to Jack, Han Shuo said callously, "Take this. Beat whoever dares to hit you." Pausing, Han Shuo pointed at the other sharp end of the broom and said faintly, "Use this sharp corner." Jack was stunned by Han Shuo's current appearance. He stared stupidly at the current Han Shuo, his legs trembling. Han Shuo was now displaying a calm and callous demeanor. There wasn't a trace of Brian's cowardice. Shoving the broom into Jack's hands, Han Shuo turned around. His face was still simple and wooden, and he was instinctively afraid. He said in a panic, Don't hit me. I'm hitting you." The group of 6 swarmed forward and suddenly exerted force with their fists and feet, aiming for Han Shuo's entire body. Clutching his head with both hands, Han Shuo first took a few steps back in fear. When he'd taken 3 steps back and arrived next to Jack, Han Shuo suddenly howled wildly as if he'd been provoked. He charged straight at the 6 like an enraged bull. Carrie was at the forefront. Seeing that Han Shuo had gone berserk again, Carrie, who'd been beaten up last time, felt his heart tremble. His right foot, which had already been lifted to kick, paused in midair and didn't dare land. However, just because Carrie didn't kick over didn't mean that Han Shuo would let him go. Han Shuo could already feel the magical yuan circulating rapidly in his back as he ran. It looked like it was already starting to digest the dark green fighting aura that Eric had left behind, just like last time. At this moment, Han Shuo only had one uncontrollable thought in his mind, and that was to beat down all the troublemakers in front of him one by one, dead or alive. Spreading his hands, Han Shuo grabbed Carrie's right foot in midair with lightning speed and lifted him up. Carrie flipped backwards in midair and landed with a plop. He grimaced in pain as his teeth made intimate contact with the ground. Traces of blood had already appeared at the corner of his mouth. The four who'd come to help Carrie and Borg were immediately startled when they saw Han Shua's ferocity. Their originally sinister smiles suddenly froze as their expressions became a bit odd. "Don't be afraid, he's just one person. There are 6 of us here, we can beat him to death with a flurry of punches." Borg straightened his neck and suddenly opened his mouth to speak. He pulled out a 4-legged wooden stool from somewhere and threw it at Han Shua with a yell. The other 4 who'd just lost their momentum were all shaken by Borg's words. They slowly pulled out sticks from their waists and followed behind Borg, swinging them at Han Shua's head. They'd even prepared their weapons. Han Shua's eyes narrowed slightly as he saw that Borg's stool was about to smash into him. He suddenly exerted strength in his legs and dodged it. Bam! The stool smashed into the stone floor and its 4 legs swayed wildly with a creak. It looked a bit unsteady. Borg let out a soft "eh" as he missed. A look of astonishment appeared on his face, as if he hadn't expected that Han Shua would be able to dodge it. Bam! Han Shua's fist smashed into the bridge of Borg's nose, causing blood to blossom. Borg threw his head back and staggered 2 steps back. He even loosened his grip on the stool in pain. Han Shua lowered his head and laughed coldly. He grabbed the stool that Borg had dropped and turned to face a short, stocky red-haired ambusher behind him. The wooden stick whooshed through the air. Just as it was about to land on Han Shua's head, the stool was abruptly lifted and forcibly stopped the stick. Grabbing a stool leg with one hand, the magical yuan in Han Shua's back circulated faster and faster. Han Shua could clearly feel the fighting aura that had been wrapped around him disappearing into the magical yuan. Han Shua's hands seemed to have an inexhaustible amount of strength as he grabbed a stool with one hand and abruptly tore it apart. The entire stool was torn in half with a creak. Han Shua grabbed one side with one hand and kicked out with his right foot, hitting the ambusher squarely in the lower abdomen. The ambusher's face immediately turned deathly pale as he crouched down in pain. Han Shua wasn't going to let him off so easily. He was feeling extremely carefree at this moment and only wanted to vent his frustrations. His left and right hands worked at the same time, smashing the stool repeatedly at the ambusher's head and face. Blood instantly burst out from the ambusher's forehead and dyed the stool in Han Shua's hands red. "Stop him! This damned lunatic, he'll kill Alva!" Borg cried out in terror as his nose was flattened by Han Shua's punch. 2 streams of blood flowed out of his nostrils like worms. Even Carrie struggled to his feet. Although he was a bit terrified, he still raised the wooden club he'd hidden earlier with trembling hands and charged towards Han Shua with the rest of the group. Crack, crack. The sounds of intense collisions rang out incessantly. Jack, who was watching the battle from the sidelines, had his legs bent and trembling as he looked at Han Shua in disbelief. Han Shua was holding onto half of the stool with one hand, completely unfazed by the combined attacks of several people. A bone-piercing chill seeped out of his eyes on his crazed and barbaric face. Han Shua's body kept shifting and dodging, but the stool never stopped. It continued to smash at the noses and faces of those who were surrounding him. In just a short while, all 6 of them had blood bursting out of their faces. At this moment, Jack was completely dumbfounded by Han Shua's callous methods. He never dared to imagine that the cowardly and meek Han Shua would one day have such a ruthless side to him. Just as Jack was in a daze, the fighting aura that Eric had left behind on Han Shua's back was finally being slowly refined by the magical yuan as he fought as he pleased. It was only at this moment that Han Shua was startled. He suddenly realized what he was doing and couldn't help but feel some lingering fear. There are sounds of fighting. What's going on? Let's go to the training field and take a look. Suddenly, Han Shua heard Fanny's voice from afar, followed by the sound of footsteps rapidly approaching. On the other hand, Carrie, Borg, and the others were still completely unaware. Each and every one of them was trembling with fear as they looked at Han Shua with faces full of fear and shock. They all held clubs in their hands, but no one actually dared to take another step closer. Han Shua knew that this was not a small matter. His mind quickly churned with ideas, and he suddenly ran towards the entrance of the training field. As he ran, Han Shuo carelessly wiped the fresh blood on the stool on his face and forehead, then casually threw away the 2 blood-stained halves of the stool. He grabbed at the wound on his back where Eric had stabbed him yesterday and tore it forcefully. With a pained howl, the wound that hadn't completely scarred split open in an instant, and fresh blood flowed out and dyed his back red. When he reached the entrance, Han Shua's sprinting speed came to an abrupt halt. He abruptly lay on the ground and struggled to crawl towards the entrance. When he saw Fanny and the others appear, Han Shua extended his blood-stained hands. His forehead and nose were covered in blood, and he whimpered with a face full of fear, Many of them hit me. Save me. Chapter 17. Fanny panicked when she saw Han Shua's pitiful appearance. Her long, slender, and beautiful legs moved quickly as she ran towards Han Shua. Han Shua screamed and looked at Fanny with a deathly pale face. He stammered in pain, Master Fanny, you stepped on my hand. Fanny was nearsighted to begin with and ran too fast in her panic. She didn't pay attention to what was beneath her feet at all. Add to that the fact that Han Shua was lying on the ground with his hands outstretched in order to make it look real, and so it resulted in the current situation where he was being stepped on. Fanny was wearing a pair of tall boots with a long, thin heel. Adding to the fact that Fanny had a burst of momentum as she ran, she stepped on Han Shua's left hand. The pain on Han Shua's face wasn't fake at all, it was real pain that seeped into his bones. Han Shua hadn't suffered any injuries in his fight with Carrie and the others, but now that he was stepped on by Fanny, he felt a bone-piercing pain. I'm sorry, Brian, I didn't see your hand reach out so long. Fanny was greatly shocked and hurriedly apologized. She then stepped on Han Shua's left boot and hastily dodged in her surprise, quickly falling to the right. But the place where her foot landed just happened to be Han Shua's outstretched right hand. Seeing that the sharp boot was about to harm his right hand, Han Shua was scared out of his wits. He pulled his right hand back like lightning and wiped the blood off his face. He pointed at the dumbfounded Carrie and the others behind him and complained, They hit me. Fanny's face instantly darkened when she heard these words. Although Carrie and the others' faces were full of wounds, they had already wiped the blood off their faces when they heard that someone was coming and were afraid of being held accountable. It was just that in their panic, the blood had been smeared on the weapons they had thrown away. They had originally planned to swallow the bitter pill in silence and cover up the matter. Who would have thought that Han Shua would be so vicious as to frame them after beating them up? Fanny's beautiful eyes were sharp as she stared at Carrie and the others. She discovered that although their clothes were disheveled, there were no traces of blood on their faces. There were, however, some traces of blood on the wooden rods in the distance. With just a glance, and then looking down at the blood on Han Shua's face and back, Fanny had already wisely figured out the matter. Carrie and the others had joined forces to beat up Han Shua, and the blood on the wooden sticks was the evidence. I will explain this matter to the school authorities. You people can just wait to be punished. So many people bullying a thin and weak Brian, I really feel ashamed for you all. Fanny looked coldly at Carrie and the others and said in a sharp voice, Master Fanny, it's not like this, he was the one who hit us. Jack, you saw it, don't you think it was Brian who hit us? Carrie was shocked and shouted in panic. On the other side, little fatty Jack's legs were still trembling. He had been shocked by Han Shua's crazy actions. When he heard Carrie's words, Jack glanced at Han Shua from afar and found that Han Shua was lying on the ground and was winking at him. Emboldened, Jack puffed out his belly and pointed at the others with his chubby right hand, saying righteously, Carrie, don't lie. I'm not afraid of you now that Master Fanny is here. You people hit Brian and you want me to lie for you? Honest Jack can't do it. Carrie and the others wanted to say something, but Fanny snorted coldly and raised her hand to stop them. Stop quibbling and wait to be punished. Turning around, Fanny looked at the miserable Han Shua and walked up to grab Han Shua's collar. She helped Han Shua up and said softly, Let's go, I'll take care of your injuries first. You're my research subject, you can't get injured so often. As Fanny spoke, The fragrance from her mouth sprayed onto Han Shua's nose. Han Shua suddenly felt that the back of his hand that had been stepped on no longer hurt. With his back facing Fanny, Han Shua gave Jack a look to tell him to hurry up and leave. He then looked at Carrie and the others with a silly smile. However, they were first beaten up by Han Shua and then set up by Han Shua. Now that they saw the silly smile on Han Shua's face, they felt that it was the most terrifying and evil smile in the world. 10 minutes later, in Fanny's lab. Apart from Fanny, the little witch, Lisa, also came to Fanny's lab with the excuse that she wanted to ask Fanny some questions. Along the way, Lisa looked at Han Shua with an odd look in her eyes, making Han Shua feel that something wasn't quite right. When they arrived at Fanny's lab, Fanny had Han Shua lie down on the bed and found a bottle of medicine. She was about to help Han Shua apply it when Lisa laughed lightly and snatched the bottle from Fanny's hands, chuckling, "Master Lisa, you don't have your glasses, let me help him apply the medicine." Fanny didn't mind Lisa's words and nodded, That's fine. Help him treat his wounds and I'll find some gauze. I don't know where I put it." Fanny muttered to herself as she rummaged around the lab. At this time, Lisa held the medicine bottle in her left hand and dipped a drop in her right hand on Han Shua's back. She even moved closer to Han Shua and said in a low voice, This wound doesn't look like it was just pierced. How come the surface is already scabbing?" Shocked, Han Shua cursed inwardly. It looked like he had underestimated the strangeness of his body. After training in demonic arts, his recovery rate had increased. The wound that he had received in the early morning had already started to scab, and now Lisa had seen through it. Not making a sound, Han Shua knew that it was useless to say anything at this time. He might as well play dumb to the end and pretend that he didn't hear what Lisa said. He kept groaning as if his wound was very painful. At this time, an intense pain suddenly came from the wound on his back. Han Shua immediately cried out in pain and abruptly turned his head to glare at Lisa. When he saw that Lisa's eyes were filled with the smugness of having discovered someone's secret, Han Shua inwardly cursed that something was wrong. He then laughed foolishly and said the word, "pain," before turning his head away. "Brian, what's going on?" On the other side, Fanny was still rummaging through the gauze when she heard Han Shua cry out in pain. She couldn't help but ask from afar, "Oh, Master Fanny, I accidentally touched his wound just now. It's nothing, I'll be more careful this time." "Then be careful," Fanny responded and didn't pay any more attention to the situation on this side. A delicate fragrance seeped into his nostrils, followed by hot breaths by his ears. Lisa said lowly, "Damned Brian, do you think I don't know that you're pretending to be crazy? You scared me by pretending to be dead and then gave me the wrong method of refining medicine. If I hadn't been smart enough to experiment on Carrie and Borg, I would have died because of you. I'll tell you the truth, I arrived at the lab before Carrie and the others. I saw your conversation with Jack through an evil spirit, including the beating up of Carrie afterwards. You've grown up now, you've even learned how to frame people. Not bad, not bad." Lisa continued to apply the medicine on Han Shua as she spoke. However, it was obvious that Lisa was purposefully messing with Han Shua and often applied force to Han Shua's wound. Now that Lisa had seen through Han Shua's disguise, he was a bit perturbed. He didn't know what Lisa was planning. Although his wound was in great pain, he didn't dare cry out loudly and could only grit his teeth and cry out in a low voice. Her small, fragrant lips moved to Han Shua's ear and her fragrance wafted into Han Shua's face. Seeing that Han Shua wouldn't make a sound, Lisa immediately said viciously, "Damn it, you even kissed me in the training fields last time, and touched that place of mine. I won't let you go. I'll wait for you at the fake mountain behind the school building tonight. You're dead if you don't come." Lisa pressed down hard on Han Shua's wound again after she'd finished speaking. Seeing that Han Shua was grimacing in pain and groaning, she giggled delightedly. She then walked in front of Fanny and handed the medicine to Fanny, saying, "Master Fanny, I've already applied the medicine on him. I suddenly remembered that I have something to do and will be leaving first. I'll ask you about the difficult problem tomorrow." "Oh, then go do what you need to do." Fanny responded carelessly and then exclaimed in surprise, I finally found it." So it was here. After exclaiming, Fanny held the gauze in her hand and moved her beautiful legs to Han Shua's side. She was about to bandage Han Shua's wound when she moved closer to take a look. She couldn't help but say in confusion, why are there signs of scarring on the surface of the skin? Han Shua's head was tilted towards the bed. He'd been worried about Lisa's actions just now and didn't know how he was going to face her tonight. Now that he heard Fanny's words, his heart jumped again, wondering if even Fanny was suspicious of him. Fanny furrowed her brow and thought for a moment after she'd said this. Her brow then relaxed and she exclaimed in a self-righteous manner, the swelling on your forehead also quickly subsided when Fitch hit you last time. Don't tell me it's because you were hit by the agony of the undead magic that caused the change? Oh, this is unbelievable. Han Shua had nothing to say to Fanny's self-righteousness. He really didn't know how her brain could be so imaginative to be able to find a suitable explanation for something so outrageous. Fanny sighed to herself after she'd finished speaking and then started to bandage Han Shua's wound. Her movements were quite gentle, as if she was afraid of hurting Han Shua. Han Shua sighed inwardly that Fanny's technique was indeed much better than Lisa's. He turned his head to thank Fanny when he suddenly saw a tall, thin figure looking at him jealously from the open lab door behind Fanny. The figure only disappeared in front of the door when he discovered Han Shua's gaze. It was Fitch. Chapter 18. Because Han Shua was injured, Fanny didn't plan on tormenting Han Shua any further today. She let Han Shua go after bandaging his wounds and seeing that he was fine. Han Shua felt a bit vaguely vexed along the way. He hadn't thought that Lisa would see through his act so quickly. He'd caused her quite a bit of trouble recently, but she'd thought that he was a bit crazy and hadn't taken it to heart. Now that she knew that he'd been playing tricks on her, she was definitely looking for trouble. He didn't know how Lisa was going to deal with him when he arrived at the back of the school building tonight. Just as Han Shua was frowning and thinking wildly, he'd unknowingly returned to the warehouse where he lived. Just as Han Shua was about to open the door and enter, he discovered that Carrie and Borg were cowering in front of the door. These two had been beaten up the worst by Han Shua back in the training fields because they were the main conspirators. Both of them were now badly battered and their faces were a bit deformed. Han Shua's heart raced when he saw the two and he began to size up his surroundings. He wondered how many people were lying in ambush since the two had come so quickly for revenge. Han Shua narrowed his eyes after looking around and stared at the two without saying a word. He slowly walked to the side and came to the washing area. He picked up a hard rock and laughed foolishly. Do you still want to fight? Carrie and Borg both shuddered when they saw Han Shua bring back a rock. Carrie hurriedly said, Brian, please let us go. We know that it's our fault for offending you in the past. We won't dare do it again. Please let us go. Borg was also looking at Han Shua with fear on his face. With trembling hands, he took out 2 silver coins from his pocket and walked timidly to Han Shua. He handed them to Han Shua and pleaded, Brian, this is our sincerity. Please ask Master Fanny to let us go. Otherwise, the school will expel both of us. Our families are very poor, and we rely on our odd jobs at the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force to earn a few silver coins to survive. Please let us go. So it was begging for mercy. Han Shua casually threw the stone in his hand to the side. The naive look in his eyes faded away. He placed his hands on his shoulders and looked at the two of them leisurely. After a while, Han Shua smiled and said, I don't want these 2 silver coins. Borg and Carrie glanced at each other and then looked at the calm and unruffled Han Shua. They both knelt down on one knee and begged, Brian, please let us go. We won't dare do it again. Get up and talk, get up and talk. Han Shua hurriedly moved closer to the two and helped them up from the ground with a smile. He then said, I don't want the silver coins, but I'll ask Master Fanny to let you go if you agree to one condition. I won't make trouble for you in the future. At this point, how could Borg and Carrie not know that Han Shua had been playing the fool all along? Han Shua's cruel methods in the training fields had intimidated them to the point that they no longer dared to harbor any thoughts of revenge. The current Han Shuo had completely exceeded their imaginations. No matter what condition it is, we'll agree to it, Borg said hurriedly and looked fervently at Han Shuo. Nodding his head, Han Shuo looked at the two unruffled in the midst of chaos and said lightly, "In the future, the two of you will be more diligent in helping me with Aaron's missions. As long as you agree, I'll go plead for mercy on Fanny's side." "No problem, Brian, don't worry. We know what to do and we'll definitely complete your missions well." Carrie hurriedly agreed, as if afraid that Han Shuo would go back on his word. There were only 4 Aaron students in the necromancy major. If Carrie and Borg were really kicked out by the school authorities and no replacements could be found in a short period of time, then the missions that had originally belonged to the two would inevitably fall to Han Shuo and Jack. In this way, Han Shuo would no longer have any free time. This was naturally something that he didn't want to see. Now that Carrie and Borg had agreed to finish Han Shuo's tasks, Han Shuo would have more energy to do other things. What goes around comes around. Brian had always helped the two with a lot of extra work back then. Now that the tables had been turned, it could be said that he was indirectly helping the unlucky Brian take revenge. Seeing that the sky had already darkened, Han Shuo thought that it was almost time for his appointment with Lisa. He couldn't help but say a bit impatiently, all right, I still have to make a trip to the back of the school building. You guys can go back if there's nothing else. Be careful in the future and don't think that I'm crazy and stupid. If you dare reveal what happened today, I'll beat you up until you can't even recognize each other." When Carrie and Borg heard Han Shuo's chilling threat, they both hurriedly agreed. Han Shuo's merciless and ruthless methods had already left a deep mark in their hearts last time in the training fields, making it so that they didn't dare harbor any thoughts of revenge. Just as Han Shuo was about to leave, Borg suddenly thought of something and called out to Han Shuo, "Brian, when you get to the back of the school building, don't walk through the fake mountain. Lisa just instructed Carrie and I to set up 3 traps, including a net and a hole. She said that it's to test the intelligence of the summoned creature, so don't walk in by accident." Han Shuo was stunned and understood after a moment's thought. It looked like Lisa had long since prepared for this. She wasn't testing the summoned creature's intelligence, she'd prepared it specifically for him. "Where did you guys set up the traps? Tell me in detail so that I don't really walk in when it's dark." Han Shuo frowned as he spoke to Borg and Carrie. How would the two know that Lisa had set up the traps specifically to deal with Han Shuo? Add to that the fact that they had a favor to ask of Han Shuo on one hand and they were truly afraid of Han Shuo on the other. They hurriedly explained the locations of the 3 traps to Han Shuo in great detail. See you tomorrow. Remember to wipe down the stone statues along the way first. I want to sleep in tomorrow." Han Shuo casually instructed the two and walked towards the fake mountain behind the school building as if nothing had happened. At the corner of a fake mountain behind the dark major school building, the little she-devil Lisa hid behind the fake mountain, a trace of a mischievous smile tugging at the corners of her lips. Her eyes sparkled as she looked excitedly at Han Shuo, who was gradually appearing in the distance. "That damned Brian, he actually dared to play the fool and play tricks on me. Not only did he scare me by pretending to be a corpse, he kicked my butt in the training field, and even gave me a disgusting refining recipe. See if I don't screw you to death this time." Lisa thought hatefully in her heart as she tightened her grip on the rope in her hand. The other end of the rope was tied in a circle and placed on the path that Han Shuo had to take to reach the fake mountain. As long as Han Shuo's 2 feet stepped into the circle, Lisa would pull with all her might and she would be able to immediately bring Han Shuo down. A large net had long since been spread out from a protruding rock in the sky, waiting for Han Shuo's legs to be bound. Lisa laughed coldly in her heart as she watched Han Shuo walk over in a daze. She only saw Han Shuo look left and right as he slowly walked forward like a thief. He said as he walked, "Lisa, where are you? Come out. I'm here. Come over, I have something to say to you. If you don't come, you're dead." Lisa snorted softly from behind the fake mountain. Han Shuo looked left and right as if he didn't know anything and walked towards the trap with the rope. Lisa's heart leapt with joy and she tightened her grip on the rope in her hand with some excitement, waiting attentively for Han Shuo's 2 feet to fall into the trap. Just as one of Han Shua's 2 feet was about to fall into the trap, he suddenly stopped and yelled out again, "Lisa, where are you hiding?" The trap was just a few inches in front of Han Shua's feet. Lisa almost couldn't control herself and was about to make a move as she watched Han Shua about to step into it. However, when she discovered that Han Shua had suddenly stopped, her heart abruptly trembled in her miscalculation. Just as Lisa relaxed and was about to open her mouth to reply, Han Shua's body that had just stopped abruptly took 2 quick steps forward and instantly passed through the trap. He walked forward and said in a daze, "Lisa, what the hell are you doing?" In this way, Han Shua's trap and rope had been easily evaded by Han Shua's sudden pause and instantaneous movement. A wave of dejection rose in Lisa's heart, and she cursed lowly with a huff, inwardly hating Han Shua's good luck. However, she never would have thought that Han Shua's heart was actually quite clear. "I'm here, why did you only come now?" Lisa gritted her teeth in anger and revealed her hidden body from behind the fake mountain, grumbling as she stood there. "Oh, nothing, just that my back still hurts a bit, so I went back to rest for a bit. Thank you for bandaging my wounds today." Han Shua said expressionlessly and walked straight towards Lisa. Suddenly, a crunching sound rang out, as if a fragile wooden raft had been stepped on and snapped. Han Shua's panicked yell was accompanied by his body instantly disappearing from where he had been standing. However, pained groans sounded from a dark hole that had suddenly appeared. "Ah, damned Brian, you've finally fallen for it. See if I don't take care of you properly today. How dare you play the fool and bully the future Grand Magus Necromancer?" Lisa, who just had a dejected expression on her face, couldn't help but be overjoyed when she saw Han Shua fall into the trap. She immediately yelled excitedly and quickly ran out from behind the fake mountain, walking directly towards the mouth of the trap that Han Shua had fallen into. Lisa walked to the mouth of the trap with a proud smile, loudly cursing Han Shua as she took out a rock. She planned on using the rock to smash Han Shua, who had fallen into the trap, and take revenge for Han Shua's recent bullying. Suddenly, Lisa's right ankle was tightly grabbed by a hand. She was frightened out of her wits and looked down, only to discover that Han Shua's left hand was grabbing the mouth of the trap and his right hand was grabbing her ankle. He hadn't fallen into the trap at all and was currently looking at her with a naughty smile. "Come down." Han Shua laughed evilly and took advantage of Lisa's moment of panic to pull with his right hand. Lisa, who had spent so much effort to set up the trap, staggered and suddenly fell into the trap as she screamed and flailed her arms and legs with a face full of panic. Chapter 19. In her panic, Lisa's hands clawed wildly and coincidentally caught the bottom of Han Shua's trousers in midair. She gave it a sudden tug and Han Shua's body swayed violently, falling down to the bottom of the trap along with Lisa. Han Shua had taken the time to take a look at the bottom of the trap just now. Using the moonlight, he could see that there weren't any sharp spikes placed at the bottom of the trap, only a few protruding rocks. But even a few protruding rocks would cause one's body great discomfort if one were to fall into it. Han Shua's heart was surprisingly calm as he listened to Lisa's screams. He didn't know if it was because of his training in magical yuan, but Han Shua wasn't the first to feel panic whenever danger loomed over him. Instead, he would rapidly think of how to resolve the crisis. This time was no exception. The trap had been hastily set up and was only 3 meters deep, but Han Shua still had the energy to think of other things in the time it took for a spark to fly. Hearing Lisa's screams, Han Shua's magical yuan, which had just dissolved the fighting aura, suddenly flowed several times faster than usual. Just as the two were about to fiercely crash into the protruding rock, Han Shua suddenly reached out and grabbed Lisa in midair, grabbing her by the waist as she screamed in panic. Immediately after, Han Shua paid the price of sacrificing his back and buttocks to crash into the protruding rock at the bottom of the trap. Ouch! Han Shua grimaced as he cried out in pain. The wound on his back that had been bandaged not too long ago split open again, fresh blood gushing out in an instant. His buttocks, as the main point of impact, were also in great pain. Lisa hadn't suffered too much injury as she was held in Han Shua's arms. Hearing Han Shua's pained moans, Lisa couldn't help but look suspiciously at Han Shua's body after discovering that she was unharmed. She asked in surprise, "Why did you save me?" Han Shua's pained cries were cut off by Lisa's question. Suddenly, Han Shua's face darkened as he shook his head and sighed lowly, "Because I like you." Lisa felt as if she'd been struck by lightning when she heard these words. She immediately stared dumbly at Han Shua and only reacted after a while. She pointed at Han Shua and stammered, "What did you say?" "I like you, Lisa." Han Shua looked at Lisa with a face full of sincerity and said sincerely, "I've actually always liked you all these years, so I've been willing to let you experiment on me without complaint or regret. Even when you nearly killed me with the agony of the soul a few days ago, I've never resented you. However, I understand that I'm just an odd-job servant. My status is too different from yours, so I can only bury these thoughts deep in my heart, never daring to reveal them. Then, I'll use some crazy actions to beg for more attention from you. Lisa, am I stupid for doing this? I'm too despicable, I'm too shameless." Han Shua lied with a face full of sincerity as he sighed inwardly. He didn't know if it was because he'd trained in demonic arts, or because he was evil to begin with, but had slowly revealed himself in this world without too many restrictions. Lisa was completely dumbfounded by Han Shua and stared dumbly at Han Shua, forgetting to speak. It wasn't until Lisa's hands moved blindly and touched a bare thigh that she abruptly came to her senses and stood up in a panic. She glanced at Han Shua and actually blushed for the first time, seeming a bit embarrassed. Han Shua started and immediately looked down, discovering that his trousers had been torn by Lisa when he'd fallen just now. Apart from his underwear, the lower half of his thigh was completely exposed. Lisa had been sitting on his bare thigh just now. Frantically turning her head away, Lisa's voice was a bit rushed as she shouted, "I don't care if you're telling the truth or not, I won't like you anyways. You're just an errand boy in the Necromancy Major, I'll never have anything to do with you." "I understand, Lisa. I just want to stay in the Necromancy Major and watch over you from afar. I don't have any other extravagant hopes. Now that I've said the words I've held back for so many years, my heart suddenly feels much more relaxed." Han Shua's voice was low as he spoke with a face full of sorrow and sincerity. I'm leaving. I'll let bygones be bygones, but don't be delusional. You're just an errand boy, it's impossible for us to be together." Lisa had her back to Han Shua and hurriedly spoke these words when she heard Han Shua's sincere confession. She immediately chanted an incantation and summoned a skeletal warrior, having the skeletal warrior throw down the rope she'd prepared to use on Han Shua. Han Shua understood in his heart that if a woman knew that a man was secretly in love with her, no matter how much she'd hated this person in the past, she wouldn't lay her hands on someone who was secretly in love with her. Lisa was indeed the same. Lisa wouldn't like Han Shua because of his words, but she would forgive Han Shua's previous actions because of Han Shua's words. She would even help Han Shua in future matters, because she believed that Han Shua was silently in love with her. Even if she would never like Han Shua, she would still be moved and affect her future actions and judgment. Seeing that Lisa was about to leave, Han Shua revealed a devious smirk with his back to Lisa. Shortly after, he said in a low voice, "Lisa, I can do anything for you. I've tried every possible way to find out that if you want your breasts to develop fully, you must drink more papaya milk, swim more, and massage both sides of your breasts when you shower. It's said that doing this will definitely help your breasts develop well." Damned Brian, who did you hear this from? Lisa held the rope and still didn't turn back to look at Han Shua. After saying this angrily, she paused and spoke again, "What's papaya milk?" Milk is fine too. 2 cups in the morning and night." Han Shua suddenly remembered that this world didn't seem to have papaya and couldn't help but hastily explain. Abruptly turning her head, Lisa glared fiercely at Han Shua and said angrily, "Shut up. You're not allowed to tell anyone about what happened today, and you're not allowed to tell anyone that you like me, or I'll kill you." After saying this, Lisa gave an order to the skeletal warrior above. The skeletal warrior pulled on the rope and pulled Lisa up. Soon after, a series of rustling sounds could be heard, and the surface returned to silence. Exhaling lightly, Han Shuo let out a carefree chuckle. He thought to himself that he really was getting more and more wicked. How could his lies be so smooth and untraceable? Now that Lisa had let him off so easily, it was clear that this method was surprisingly effective. Snickering, Han Shuo walked a few steps and saw that the rope that Lisa had left behind was still there. He reached out and tugged at it, discovering that the other end should be wrapped around the fake mountain. Han Shuo was overjoyed. He understood that Lisa must have lent him a hand in passing before she left. After grabbing the rope and climbing out, Han Shuo swaggered back to his warehouse. Letting the little skull rebandage his back, Han Shuo first practiced his magical yuan. He felt that not only had the magical yuan in his body grown a bit stronger, but it was also circulating a bit faster. After practicing the mystical glacial spellfire for a long time, the magical yuan could already circulate to his wrist. Han Shuo couldn't help but be overjoyed. Could it be that the magical yuan had digested the fighting aura that Eric had injected into his body? Han Shuo furrowed his brow as he thought to himself. He recalled Claude's performance after he'd been injured by Claude's fighting aura. Han Shuo slowly began to suspect that the magical yuan within his body had the ability to absorb fighting aura to strengthen himself. Why would the magical yuan that he was training have such a strange effect? Han Shuo couldn't figure it out after thinking for a while, so he didn't continue thinking about it. He then began to meditate and train his mental strength. As his mind went blank, Han Shuo suddenly felt restless as he was training his mental strength. He couldn't immediately enter a meditative state like he normally would, as if something in his surroundings was disturbing his meditation, as if it was calling him. This feeling was very strange. At first, Han Shuo didn't pay attention to it, but after being repeatedly disturbed in his meditation, he began to pay attention to this feeling. After Han Shuo calmed his mind and he immediately sensed that the thing that had disturbed his meditation seemed to be coming from under the bed, and there was only the bag that he had gotten from Dylan under the bed. With a thought, Han Shuo reached into the bag and took out the sinister dark green jade box. Feeling the cold air from within the dark green jade box, Han Shuo couldn't help but shiver. He began to carefully examine the green jade box. The thing that had interrupted Han Shuo's meditation was the dark green jade box in front of him. Han Shuo still didn't know what was inside the jade box. Han Shuo hadn't paid much attention to it last time, but now, in order to smoothly meditate, Han Shuo had no choice but to pay attention to this jade box. Picking up the green key, Han Shuo inserted the key into the groove in the jade box. After exerting force left and right, he discovered that he couldn't twist the key. He couldn't help but reveal a puzzled expression. The key couldn't open the jade box. Han Shuo was surprised and began to feel puzzled. Carefully recalling the situation from last time, a thought struck Han Shuo and he slowly focused his mental strength on the jade box. Suddenly, a cold air invaded Han Shuo's mind from within the jade box, causing Han Shuo's head to hurt. Forcefully enduring the pain, Han Shuo's mental strength was unprecedentedly focused. Even the magical yuan within his body circulated much faster than usual. Enduring the invasion of the cold air from within the jade box, Han Shuo tried to twist the key again. With a snap, the key twisted to the right and the jade box suddenly sprang open, revealing the item hidden within. Welcome to Immortal Cultivation Audiobooks, your gateway to the mystical world of Xianxia. Dive into legendary tales of martial arts, spiritual growth, and immortal ascension. Here, we bring you full-length English audiobooks of the best Wuxia and Xianxia stories, from young prodigies to ancient sect wars. Perfect for fans of Against the Gods, Martial World, and tales of demons and gods.